Hi everyone, my name is Alasdair, but I usually go by Ali. I'm a staff engineer at NatCat and a core maintainer at Code Your Future. Today I'm going to be talking about creating the next generation of senior engineers. Sadly, I won't be talking about this next generation of senior engineers, that's next generation. Instead, I'm going to be talking about pedagogy, which is the scientific study of teaching. A lot of what I learned about pedagogy is through a charity based here in the UK called Code Your Future. I've been volunteering with them as a teacher and a core maintainer since 2017. Our mission is to teach development skills to those without access to traditional education. We recently hit a milestone of 300 grads hired across companies like Slack, the BBC, and many more. Haman and Sadia will be speaking more about Code Your Future on this stage tomorrow morning, and I think on the other stage later today. So keep an eye out for them. We're in the era of layoffs and hiring freezes. We're being pushed to do more with less. So how can you get your team moving quicker and with less help? I believe we can learn from the field of pedagogy to unlock our existing team's potential. But I bet you're thinking, I'm not a teacher. How does this apply to me? In my experience, you are doing some form of teaching in your day-to-day work. Here's some examples which I think are relatively obvious, but some that are perhaps less obvious. So I'd like to reframe pedagogy around all of these everyday engineering skills. So now let's take a quick tour past some of the core concepts from pedagogy and see how they can be applied in your work. First, we need to understand who you're teaching. Next, we need to provide structured guidance for them. And finally, we need to deliver the teaching effectively. As we learn, we build increasingly more nuanced and complex mental models. Experts have a mental model that is more like a densely connected graph. This allows them to make intuitive leaps, like from A to E on this diagram, whereas non-experts have to go the long way around. So the first step in teaching is to get a good understanding of our learners' mental models. You have to understand what they know and where the gaps might be. So how can we build a quick understanding of the mental model of our team? Get comfortable asking lots of coaching-style questions, as these can help uncover any misconceptions they might have. A bit of patience is required. If you can tell something's not landing, try not to jump in with answers, even if that's a bit frustrating. It really does help if they can have a go and solve it themselves. Reframing your question or making it more precise can help fit the question into their mental model better. I like to ask questions like, what's happening on line 15, to drive focus towards the correct answer, but leave the door open for any misunderstandings they might have. So now that we know a little bit about our learners, I'd like to cover a common teaching pitfall. A study in 2003 identified something they called the expertise reversal effect. Simply put, they found that techniques that work for experts in a subject don't necessarily work for non-experts in that subject, or could even have a negative effect. Their findings show that non-experts need guidance in order to form the more detailed mental models that experts have. So we need to have a structured plan for what to teach and how to deliver it. So how can we provide that guidance? Try switching to more active learning and work on something practical if you can. Pairing has been shown to be an effective tool for teaching. Encourage them to experiment when they're problem solving, but be prepared to provide guidance if things go off track. And finally, remember that your mental model doesn't match that of who you're teaching. We need to practice empathy for them.
If you're enjoying this, Lead Dev's got loads more to offer.
I have written some blog posts for the website in the past. I know the recordings from all the conferences are up there. You should definitely check it out.
Lead Dev can offer you a variety of things, from blogs, webinars, panels, Slack community which is super supportive.
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
To help provide learning guidance, we can use a technique called backwards design to build a development plan. This is a technique involving working backwards from a desired outcome to create a set of learning objectives. Learning objectives act as a series of small tests to check the learner's understanding towards the overall topic. In other words, backwards design is the test-driven development of pedagogy. And this is how we work at Code Your Future. We write and publish learning objectives before we deliver any content. so everyone can check their progress against those learning objectives before, during, and after teaching. So as an example, I had a colleague join from a boot camp where he'd only ever used single-page apps. We had a multi-page app. So this was added as a topic to his development plan. And from there, we identified learning objectives to learn the topic of multi-page apps. I've put a couple of examples up here. As a practical tip, think of learning objectives like SMART goals. They should be roughly measurable or verifiable in some way. I've also found frameworks like Bloom's taxonomy to be helpful when writing learning objectives. For a final section, we need to look a bit about how the brain works so that we can deliver teaching in an effective way. Roughly speaking, memory can be divided into working or short-term memory versus long-term memory. As teachers, we can't place anything directly into long-term memory. We can only add to working memory first, and with the right practice, it gets transferred into long-term memory. But working memory is very limited, between 5 and 9 so-called chunks, where a chunk is a group of strongly associated information. We could think of it as a snippet of syntax, a control structure, or a design pattern. Solving problems requires effort on part of the learner. This is called cognitive load. But some of this effort is desirable going towards the process of learning. But as we've just seen, working memory is very, very limited. So if we overload the working memory with too many chunks, then it works against the learning process. I've borrowed a slide here from a researcher called Felian Hermans, who introduced a programming language called Hedi. This demonstrates one of the ways that we manage cognitive load when teaching English. Lessons start by only focusing on the words. We're really happy if a child can just write the right letters in the right order. And then we add more rules over time. So sentences start with a capital letter, sentences end with a full stop, etc. Progressively, we build up to a relatively complex rule set. But at each individual step, learners only need to process a few chunks of new information at a time. And here's some code snippets from Hedi showing how it also introduces rules progressively, but in the context of programming. At level 1, the only valid keyword is print. Then moving up to level 2, variables are introduced, but there's still only 2 valid keywords at this point. Level 3 brings in lists and a random keyword, and this continues all the way up to level 18, by which time Hedi is actually just equivalent to Python. This shows how Hedi restricts the number of chunks in the learner's working memory, reducing the negative effects of cognitive load. So how can we push back on cognitive load in our teaching? Try to guide learners to only 1 or 2 learning objectives at a time. Check in on progress towards the learning objective with a really quick test question. Asking learners to make predictions is a really great way to come up with test questions like this on the fly. I like to ask questions like, if I were to change X, how would that change the output? And as a practical tip, if you think something that comes up is a distraction, write it down on a shared doc or a whiteboard, and you can revisit when you think you have some time to focus on it. Hopefully, I've convinced you that we should see teaching as an investment in our teams. I think we can learn from pedagogy to help us understand our learners' mental models, structure their learning with learning objectives, deliver teaching without overloading working memory. We can use all of these techniques to unlock the potential of our existing teams. Before we wrap up, I wanted to recommend this book, Teaching Tech Together. Much of what I learned about the science of pedagogy is based on this really great book. It's full of great practical exercises for you to learn the topic as well. Best of all, it's freely available at that URL. And of course, no talk would be complete without a shameless plug. So I've put the link to volunteer with Code Your Future there, or there's a stand outside where you can come talk to us there. I've also put a couple of other organizations with similar missions, if you can't make it along to Code Your Future. I found that teaching has been a really great way for me to practice my mentoring and coaching skills and become a better engineering leader. Thanks for listening.